Do you know how far of distance you have to have?
Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the North Bend City Council work session for Monday, February 9th, 2021. Welcome this afternoon. Here we are already into February. The first item on the agenda after calling our meeting to order is a presentation by Coos Health and Wellness. And I believe we have our presentation this afternoon.
Madam
correct?
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
as the Assistant Director of Coos Health and Wellness, I must recuse myself from this conversation.
Okay, you are recused. Eric, so for the record, Councilor Eric Leeson is recusing himself from this presentation and conversation. And
thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. We have two guests with us today. We have Mike Raleigh, the Director of Coos Health and Wellness. He is represented by Joe Aguirre, who is the real estate and broker of record. And they would like to make a presentation on a grant initiative regarding a hotel acquisition here in North Bend. Joe, I believe that you have a presentation, but Mike, if you want to address us first, and we'll cue you up here.
No, I'm good. Joe will present the slides.
Yes, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about it, guys. And thank you very much for taking some time to talk to us today and give us the opportunity to chat with you folks on this one. The presentation you guys have, I just did a quick PowerPoint and kind of kept it brief and simple so as not to take up a whole lot of time and energy. Quite honestly, it's a pretty simple proposal, and you folks might be a little aware of it as well. Can everybody hear me okay? And did everybody get kind of a copy of this thing to glance over while we review? Okay, sounds good.
Joe?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
While you're talking, go ahead and bring up the presentation on the screen for the benefit of those viewers that are watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like host has disabled screen sharing, but I can just hold them up for you guys here, I guess.
Going. There you go. You're good to go. Go ahead and share.
All right, good, because I would. If we could go through and share this. Perfect. You guys got that?
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so basically, I'll start back on slide one. The project proposal is for the Parkside Motel located at 1480 Sherman Ave in North Bend. And the first slide here is just basically got Mike's information as the Director of Coos Health and Wellness. Patrick Wright is the Executive Director of Operation Rebuild Hope, who we've kind of partnered with on this project and for the future use after the pandemic. And then, like Mike mentioned, I'm the broker of record, kind of just facilitating the deal and making sure this is all going to go through. Basically, the need is in response to the pandemic, Coos Health and Wellness is responsible for providing the shelter for COVID-affected individuals in Coos County, including the transit population, for basically isolation and self-quarantine. In addition, we hope to partner with Operation Rebuild Hope to provide some of that emergency housing to some unsheltered veterans in the area. So the need is there, obviously, with limited vaccines and things like that, and this trying times we've got. Obviously, the need for this shelter. I mean, you see it out there. We're all members of the community. To address the need, the intent, and this is really under the project turnkey, which is the grant funds available. The intent is to purchase an established motel for that sheltering of COVID-affected individuals for quarantine and isolation, as well as the unsheltered veterans. Some of the units are move-in ready, and the facility is pretty close. I mean, it's currently occupied and operational. So really, we can start using this immediately upon closing for quarantine and isolation. Some of the units will need to be upgraded, added kitchenettes, that kind of thing as well. After the pandemic, we plan on getting Operation Rebuild Hope a little more involved, transferring the facility to them, and at that point, addressing any zoning violations, things like that as well prior to. And And basically we've got the grant funds to get it fixed up as well. I mean, it's a little bit of a eyesore on the edge into town with the old dilapidated sign and the poor old fisherman, the big wooden fisherman guy is pretty ugly and it needs a little TLC. So we plan on purchasing the motel, fixing it up and, using it as needed. The grant opportunity from Operation Turnkey, and this is really where we need the help from you guys is, Oregon legislators got $35 million for these projects. They plan on doing approximately 9 to 12 properties acquired by local and have up to 500 units available readily for this. Some other counties have already got approved. Ashland just got a 38 unit Super 8 approved through this Project Turnkey. That one was 4.2 million. And they're up and running, and they're really off to the races on that, getting that project going. So this is something we're right in the middle of getting going. And between Mike and I and Patrick, we hope to get this all approved, get the grant funds, and provide this sheltering for the community members in need. The base requirements for this I've got noted here. And it's, basically having the readiness and the ability to do it, having the support services in place. And that's where Mike comes in, and his organization really provides a lot of that. And just all the different programs he's got for the people in need. And we'll get to it on the last slide. Same with Operation Rebuild Hope. It's about giving these people a safe place to stay and to get back on their feet, basically. The big requirement, though, and the one thing that the whole ask here is zoning compliance. So this is out of compliance currently in this piece, and this is where we ask you to, and that's on the next slide, some ask of you. But basically, if we bring this project to the grant with a zoning problem, they're going to automatically kick us back and say, hey, this site is unacceptable, go fish, go find another hotel, something that's in compliance. We can't put it on the grant process as it's current. We need your guys' buy-in to basically say, hey, and let me just get to that next slide. What action is needed from you guys? We're really requesting for a temporary abatement of the zoning requirements under your executive powers during the pandemic. There's nothing that can't be handled. It seems like we've talked a lot with Ms. Schlabel, and the process is very easy. I mean, it's not easy, but it's streamlined, and they're willing to do it. We just can't do it prior to closing because we need it to not have zoning issues to go get the funds. So we're asking for that temporary abatement. And the agreement will also include, the current owner is back on his delinquent taxes, both transient and I think property as well. Obviously, those will be paid upon closing, and the county, including Coos Health and Wellness and myself, will begin to address the land and zoning issues within 45 days of closing. And really, I think Mike is on board. We're going to just get to it. As soon as we own the darn thing, we'll start the process. Chelsea's got us all the paperwork. We'll put it in front of you guys for a real approval. We need a temporary abatement until we can buy the thing, like I've said. We would also hope that you would temporarily halt the notice of violation against the current owner, just to give us enough time to get the property closed. We're really looking at end of March, hopefully, if all things line up correctly. And at that time, we would, like I says, get the zoning issues really addressed appropriately. And of course, the violation process would be null and void at that point because we'd be taking care of things. So that's what we need from you guys, temporary abatement. We fully intend on getting it all fixed up and complying with the zoning requirements and the city ordinances. We just can't have that hanging over our head while we're trying to submit the grants and get some of these funds to rehab this hotel for this need. So that's what we're asking for you guys today, and I'll keep it kind of brief. This next slide is, and Mike could go on, and if Patrick from Operation Rebuild Hope would go on and on about the great programs that these folks provide to the community. And they provide food resources, training, job training. I mean, these guys are really doing what needs to be done to address both the transient and homeless population, but it's just Coos, I mean, it's all in the name, it's Coos Health and Wellness, and they will provide that kind of additional support. So take a moment to read this slide here and look a little bit about what these folks do. Is fantastic in the community and really is needed. So take a moment to review that and know that the desire and the need to help house these individuals is there and is sincere. And I think we've got this great opportunity to get some grant funds to do that. So it's really win-win. We're taking care of, the Coos Health and Wellness's requirements to house these pandemic individuals. But then we're also, taking care of some unsheltered veterans as well. In looking at the zoning too, I did get a couple of drone pictures just so you could see the proximity. So here you've got the Parkside Motel, here you've got Brian's home, and they're really very close proximity. Yes.
We can't see that. You'll have to share.
Oh, okay. Can't share that screen. Okay, no worries.
You can, we're still seeing your presentation.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's see if we stop that share. Well, regardless, here we go. Here we go. It is important, just looking at, if you're thinking of zoning and you're thinking of the compliance, this one being just outside of the commercial district, you'll see here you've got the subject property, which is the blue buildings here, located directly adjacent another hotel, directly adjacent some other commercial. And then the real big thing here too is Brian's home is the big blue 2-story building here. So that's Operation Rebuild's Hope's current location. So you see the direct proximity why we can't just go fish for another hotel that's in compliance. A, they're millions of dollars, where this one's only 600,000. We got a good price on it. And B, this is right by Brian's home. So it's really going to be a great addition to the community over there. Just gives you a little shout out.
Are you able to and make it
Joe, photos and make the photo larger.
Yeah, absolutely. This one here actually shows the best, something like that.
I think it's open window. You'll have to share the window that it's opening up on.
Okay, here we can try it. Your screen sharing. Sorry, technology issues here. We're all learning this Zoom meeting stuff. Let's see. Okay, what if I stop share, new share, send to Joe. Did that work? Nope. Still don't see it? Okay, hold on. Share screen. How about that?
Yeah.
Hey, there we go. And it might be able to zoom in, but I'll try to use my mouse here too. Here's Brian's home, the current veterans housing. And then here's the subject property, the Parkside Motel. Here is the Itty Bitty Inn, which is also a currently operational hotel. And then right down here is a hair salon, massage place, maybe? Some sort of commercial use right here as well. So it's just barely out. And then actually, you guys know where this one is. This is basically the corner of Sherman and Union, I believe. And then down further, we've even got more commercial. Obviously, you've got, the Yamaha cycle shop and a few other commercial buildings down the street as well. So it seems to meet compliance, quite honestly, when you look at the zoning. Just needs to go through your process.
All right.
Hey, no problem.
All right,
Any
so
other comments, questions, concerns?
I was going to city planner wanted to say comment at this time.
I don't think so. Like he said, as long as there's a path that they should take to address the zoning compliance. So as long as, they agree to follow through with that, I think it's fine. And he's right. It's at the very edge of it's in a residential zone, right adjacent to a commercial. So it totally makes sense to change it. So I think if they went through the process, it would make sense to approve that.
Okay. Did any of the counselors have any questions?
So it's currently, may I? It's currently in a residential zone, is that correct?
It is currently residential, correct, just neighboring.
Yeah, if you want.
She's gonna pull it up here for you.
Yeah, so, I think it was Colorado. Colorado.
Yeah, it is. Colin.
Yeah, Colorado is the dividing line
Right.
between the residential zone and commercial zone. So it is in a residential zone. Of course, it's been operating as a hotel for years.
Was it built or constructed? Because I understand it's a pretty old establishment. Was it built in a residential zone, even though it was a motel?
It was built prior to zoning, so back in the 40s or 50s, and zoning didn't come in until the.
And they didn't kind of grandfather it in as what it was at that time? A motel?
It's been grandfathered in. The conundrum is that our definition of a motel says that you can only have transient use. So that's
Oh,
30 days
sure.
or less. So once they started having long-term stays, then that kicked them out of being grandfathered in.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think Paul has a question.
Oh, no, I was gonna direct it to the police chief and to ask him what he feels about the housing that they're talking about. How much of your police time is covered by homeless people?
There's a considerable amount of time, however, finding positive environments for those folks to make a path forward is, in my opinion, a good use of that facility.
Note too that the Operation Rebuild Hope has infrastructure in place to help manage that. These transients are drug tested and they go through psychiatric evaluations and the whole nine before they're allowed to stay and continue to stay as well.
Counselor, you went to Brian's home last week or so and was able to the facility, see the setup that they're going to have and the wraparound services, that it'd be great to have those individuals at the more temporary housing so closely to where they can get the resources. So it does seem to be a nice lift up for somebody who's trying to get themselves organized to, like, as the police chief said, a path forward. So what are the next steps?
So the next steps is staff will work to create what's called a abatement agreement, which will be an intergovernmental agreement because it is government to government. The city attorney will work on that document. You saw the basic terms of that agreement laid out, which is our responsibility. Our responsibility is to protect the city and our zoning process, and also the taxes that are in play. So we would write up the section that is specific to us with the criteria that you saw on your slide that says that within 45 days of closing, you'll start the zoning process. And that's the carrot and the stick, if you will, for abating the zoning and allowing them to move forward so it doesn't stand in the way. Make sure at closing that any unpaid taxes, those are your tourism taxes, property tax, et cetera, owed to the city are cleared at closing. And then certainly the plan for cleaning and refurbing that, making sure that everything's done within compliance of our code, and so that your property maintenance plan is put in place. And they've given us assurances, but that would be that intergovernmental agreement, if you will. So we'll go ahead and have that drafted. We'll do that where Coos Health and Wellness reviews it, which is usually their attorney to our attorney. And then once we're ready to go, we put it before the governing bodies in order to implement, have done. That way, there's no holdup on their process for making grant application and seeking the funds to move forward on the project, if it's the will of the council to abate that process.
Okay.
What does it do to the tax rolls?
While it's in the county's hands, it will, there are no taxes because it would be a government entity. Once it reverts back, their plan is that once the pandemic's done, for it to revert back to nonprofit. And unless the nonprofit has been given tax abatement status, which in this case, I know Brian's home has not, unless there's something new that has occurred since we've seen the latest tax rolls about 10 days ago, that it would revert back onto the tax rolls.
So tonight, I know tonight it's in the agenda as a discussion. Are we looking for a consensus from the council to move forward?
We would want a consensus before we go ahead and involve all of the legal attorney fees and everything to draft up an intergovernmental agreement with the two agencies. It wouldn't be fruitful to go through that path if the council, this does not mean you're committing yourself to a vote.
Yeah.
It just simply says, let's allow staff to move to the next step. Let's get the agreement written up and then have that presented back to you for your consideration.
Well, I definitely think from, it would benefit our community and the citizens and people in need, and would think it would be appropriate to move forward. Councilor Gall, did you have something else?
Oh, I just have a hard time thinking that we're recruiting homeless, but keep going.
I'm good with it.
Or voting? Councilor
Do-
Norhuck?
I was going to mention too, do keep in mind, this isn't just for homeless. This also has a lot more currently to do with sheltering COVID folks who need to be, self-isolated and don't have the means to do that currently. So it's not just associated with homeless. Mike's going to be housing some people associated with the pandemic for the time being.
Are we supposed to form a consensus right now during the work session?
How I'm reading this is that staff is looking for direction. Staff is looking for direction to move forward. At some point, though, there would be an official vote to, would we be amending the code at some point?
The intergovernmental agreement would be a request to abate under your executive powers during the pandemic, the current zoning restrictions, and then those other items that I mentioned would be listed in the agreement. They would then have a specific time to accomplish all of that. You're not doing anything other than giving a consensus to staff that you want us to continue to move forward. That, it is appropriate for the governing body to give directive, but you're not making a policy decision. You're not making a vote. You're simply
Right.
giving direction to staff, which is what a governing body should be doing. And the city clerk recorder has her hand raised. And so I see her pointing to the city attorney.
Yeah, just really quickly, Jessica, to answer the first question, I'm sorry, Mayor, to answer the first question that you asked, the next actual action that you guys would take at a meeting would probably be to approve or not approve the agreement when we put it in front of you.
Thank
Would
you.
be my assumption.
Okay, yeah, another question from Councilor Norhuck?
Yes, it's my understanding that the function of a work session is to receive information, and I'm comfortable with the information we have received tonight, that I can support directing staff to move forward to, as discussed, the IGA and the abatement. And I think it's going to be a very helpful use of the property. And I think it will be better managed than it is currently and provide a huge service.
Is there anybody who has a different opinion on that, or should we give staff the direction to move forward?
Well, I guess I give you my opinion. I don't know. So do whatever you want there.
Yeah, majority rules.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for your presentation tonight, and it sounds like you will be in contact with our city administrator and planning department.
Yes, thanks a lot for taking the time to hear us, guys. Appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Gleason, welcome back.
Did I miss anything good?
Number 3 on the agenda is we have a couple other discussions. A, council goals for fiscal year 2021 and 2022. We have a packet in front of us, and on page 3
I'm not finding
is
it.
the attached list of proposed goals that we came up with at our goal setting work session. And I believe our task this afternoon is to have a discussion with these and start narrowing the list down to 10 to 15 goals. Correct?
That's correct, Madam Mayor. Ideally, what you have before you is all of the goals that were put out at your goal setting. The goal is to further revise these into groups. I sent you a communication last week that basically took what you had, which is your 3 pages of goals and, you know, the tier ranks. And then I tried to logically put them into potential buckets. The buckets can change. Those are just where I saw some logical opportunities to sort of pull your list together. So the first bucket was the infrastructure and economic sustainability. And as I read these, I was trying to look for what was the end game, not just the action itself, but does it further something or does it go to an end game? And so that's where you would see things in infrastructure and economic sustainability. The next bucket was economic vitality, which consisted of housing, jobs, tourism, and managing growth. The other was public safety and health, and then followed by effective and efficient city operations. And so there's a couple ways that you can address these. You have sort of your consensus where you created your green dots, and you all can say, let's take it from that approach, or you can sort of take it as approach of your buckets and say, pick 1 or 2 or 3 in your respective buckets and say, let's spread it out across the spectrum. Or you can completely go off of the page and say, no, we don't like it up to this point. Let's jostle it even a little further. As staff, I'm here to help facilitate that process. But it's really what the will of the council is at this point as to how it wants to refine. When I say refine, generally you would have your top 5 goals, and we would list those sort of in priority. So you'd have, you know, like 1 is your top and 1-5 is number 5. And then you'd go to your level 2, then you'd go to level 3. The goal is to get about 12 to 15 in there so that when we go to the budget process, we're attaching that. And then more importantly, as we start that July 1st calendar cycle, that staff and the city is moving forward on concerted goals defined by the council. I mentioned July 1st only if some of those are budgetary in nature. We'll have to assign resources. Once the goals are assigned, then its staff will take it from there and actually create implementation schedules. And then we will periodically come back to the council with updates. And then anytime something comes up that's pertinent to the goals, you'll always hear us refer back to that. So you can decide to take it at the bucket level, or you can take it at the green dot special, if you will, almost like playing Walmart, green dot, or maybe they're yellow dots, or red dots or whatever. But which order, what's the will of the council as to how you want to address them?
Well, I want to make a point, first of all, to say that I know that if it wasn't important to this council, it wouldn't be on the list. So all of these things are important. And even though we're narrowing it down to 10 or 15 tonight, I think some of these goals will happen naturally anyways, even if they aren't on the list. There's some things that are just going to be naturally affected. This is what we're choosing for our goals for this year, but this work is not lost. And so if it's something that's not considered a top priority this year, then we'll revisit this work because this council will be together next year as well. So even though, and there's probably a few other things that might even bubble up along the way and ended up becoming part of the discussion throughout the year. So I just don't want anyone to think that if it doesn't make the cut tonight, that it's not important. So what is the will of the council on how they want to organize the priorities?
Well, since we put the time in to put our little rain marks on.
Yeah.
We should go from the top of the list on down.
Go. So I was looking at page 4, and you have, the first thing there, identify and secure additional revenues for the long-term sustainability of our city. That's a 5. And if you go all the way down to the last 2 on that page, which is the last 2, is to support, sustain, and seek economic vitality for our local businesses. I think I counted, that would bring us to like 16
Yeah.
or 17.
15.
Was it 15?
15 would be review, revise, and implement visitor information center master plan.
And then within that, what'd you say, Eric, was it 16, 17?
Which one did you like?
Well, I would say if you
That would have
start,
been 17. Yours would have been 17.
Okay.
Yeah.
if you start with that first 5 and you go to the last 2 and you say, okay, these are the ones that have the most dots. But a couple of these that you could sort of say we would hit by doing some of the other work. So for example, city administrator, can you remind me what obtained certified local government status is?
Yeah, that conversation was CLG status allows us to apply for technical assistance grants from the state. Without CLG status, we can't get those technical assistance grants. For instance, like a technical assistance grant would be, let's say we wanted to map out or survey our historic district. We could make application for a CLG technical assistance grant. And if they approved it, they would give us a certain amount. And then generally, any matching funds would be made up in our professional services. I bet, for instance, Chelsea. You have anything you would like to add?
Well,
If so, at the microphone.
from the actual implementation code part of it, it would be the city regulating historic properties. And so it would be, we have a code, it needs to be updated. We'd update the code, and then that would get us to, we'd hold regular at least four historic landmark commission meetings a year. And that would kind of help us solidify our status. And then to maintain it, we have to do surveys to try to bring more properties in to the designated landmark commission. And then through that, anything on that document would be reviewed for historic preservation criteria when they wanted to make any kind of changes. But those properties also would be open to opportunities for grant funding. So there's kind of win for the property owner, but then there's a little more red tape involved when they want to make changes. I was just looking to your point, trying to see maybe how that might piggyback on some of these other ones. You know, it might have the opportunity to help improve tribal relations if the city were to effectively be, implementing that ordinance and working with the tribes. There's that possibility. But that's what I would say from implementation standpoint.
Yes.
I mean, some of this stuff isn't really affecting the budget and stuff. So, to have a couple on there that just like the tribal relations, I mean, that might even dovetail into, something else. So, I think the ones that are affecting the budget and that kind of funding capabilities, then we need to have them on there, just so we don't forget we're trying to make a better city here. I think there's some of these that, the July Jubilee thing and the tribal thing, those things that just could happen, with a few little items that, that maybe we can meet some of these goals. I mean, just because they're on here that doesn't mean we're gonna meet them all. But it would be nice to meet some of them. So I guess I'm just rattling there, but yeah.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, it's important to me to improve tribal relations, and we're already doing some of that work. The council president, Richardson, and I are looking at our calendars to see when we can meet with the tribal government. So even though it's not on the list, it would definitely be still a personal priority of mine.
I guess that was kind of where I was going with that, yes.
Yeah. Councilor Nordoff?
So the certified local government status, it has to do with the tribes or not so much?
No,
Just,
I wouldn't say that, Chelsea.
okay, so who are we allowed to, which agencies require that in order to entertain a grant application from us?
In this case, it would be the State Office of Historic Preservation.
Yeah, and the National Park Service too.
NPS and SHPO?
Yes.
Okay, and that's pretty much it, it's not other agencies?
Those two, because those are also the historic preservation type grants and the tax abatement grants, things of
Okay.
that nature specific. And again, if one of your focus is facade grants, that's part of the carrot and the stick, if you will, is if you're going to use, say, urban redevelopment monies, you also want to be able to make sure that you maintain the heritage and character, for instance, of your downtown, to the aesthetics approved by the governing body.
And remember, I see these, I think the city administrator had, explained it when we did the goal setting meeting about, we are looking for like operational directives on how the staff to set their priorities. Correct? Is that how you would?
So these are the overreaching goals of the governing body of where you want to see the city move forward. And so let's say that you picked one that is specific that, you say effective and efficient government is our top goal. Okay. And then you pick something that says, we want you to look to make sure that every program that we offer is needed, is properly funded, and is addressed. We as staff will look at your other goals once we determine what you're high in and see if there's any of these others on the list that will support those, so that we are always making progress to the overreaching goals. That's sort of kind of why I created the buckets, is that if you decide to go the bucket approach, it gives us opportunities to always try to work and say, okay, this is our top vision. Within those visions, these are the things that we absolutely would want staff to work on. Those are your level one. Level two, okay, keep it in mind. Level three, if you get to it. And so as we look at that, we are looking at how to make sure that we are keeping in mind the important work of our government that's reflective of the direction the governing body wants to go. So it's really your vision.
So based on that statement, if you look at, say, the fourth one down on the master list, evaluate city services for efficient and effective city government. So you could have a subsection of that main goal that would say subsection dot convert to e-permitting for public works, because that would make it more efficient.
Every single thing that would make us more efficient and effective, we're going to put under there and then try to work towards that. That doesn't mean that every single thing on the list can get, but we're going to work towards that overreaching goal for the governing body.
But if that's like an important goal for us, there's a bunch of sub goals
Yeah,
that would fall under there that I think makes it a lot easier for us to say we can narrow this down, because by narrowing it down, we're actually saying there's a lot more that we need to get done. We're effectively saying we're not narrowing anything down. We're just subgrouping, which is fine. I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
think you
great.
should have maybe five
Yeah.
hard goals, and then go through those and then do the subtasks, basically, that will tie in with those.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're gonna be all over the place.
Right,
Forever.
I think you guys are right on
Because
track,
everything's
just like
important.
Eric's statement there, Brownie's fire truck replacement deal, that can dovetail right into that, because if we don't have stuff like that, 5 years from now, we're gonna be totally screwed, so that, those could dovetail together and, yeah.
Right, there's also this one in here about the stormwater plan.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you right now that whether we make it a goal or not, within 5 years, there's probably gonna be a stormwater plan here in the city.
Well, I think with that being said, like if you just said the first 15 or 17, like you talked about, there's even some of the first 15 can
Yeah,
be
there-
under some of the first
Absolutely,
5.
absolutely.
So it's hard to say like which 15 do we pick when we know that some could be subgroups. I almost feel like it'd be nice to get them subgrouped and then say,
And so.
because even your
here-
buckets are a little more.
Yeah, here's why staff didn't subgroup them. Until we know what your priority are,
Mhm.
we can't start to move things under. And keep in mind, there's going to be another document coming back to you, but we need to know what your overreaching goal is. If your goals are, downtown businesses, then we need to know that. And then we're going to subgroup as many of these as we can, prioritize lists. But we need to know, what does this council want to accomplish from a governing body moving forward? And then how can staff, support those goals? And that's our job, to come back, create that sub list, because you ultimately have to adopt that as your goals. And then we work on our implementation. That's why I gave you the sort of point list. Is it says what you all put them on.
Right.
Now you all need to decide, okay, what's really the most important to us?
Councilman Roth, you had a comment?
Yes, Tim Slater had made the comment, I think by email, that he had reviewed our public work, Ralph Dunham's suggestions and ideas on public works, and thought that it would be good to have a work session kind of devoted to that. And I'm seeing a capital improvement program in several different departments noted on this list. There's one for police, there's one for public works, there's one in general. And so I think that we would maybe want to hear from Public Works before we finalize our priorities. And the other thing is, I've done a little checking at the mayor's request into municipal court functions. Reedsport has one, Coquille and Bandon have municipal courts also. And I did a little bit of talking to some knowledgeable people, and they think it would be more of a drain on our staff than it would bring income. We don't have people so much going around and writing tickets. We don't have officers going around and writing a lot of parking tickets like you would find in a larger city, where, I don't know, I haven't talked to the police chief.
So are
But
you saying, Councilor Roth, then to?
it might be good to just drop that off
To
the
drop
list
that off.
and not make it a priority.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
For what it's worth, Counselor Nordhoff, I can add to that a little. We looked into that right after I got back into town, so like 5 or 6 years ago, and came to the same conclusion. But I have a file full of research on that if anyone is curious about digging into more.
We
Okay.
trust you.
So I honestly believe that by looking at the front page with the 5 dots is a goal.
Mhm.
Identify and secure additional revenues for long-term sustainability of our city. And I think a lot of stuff falls under that category. I mean, that is a main goal to me. And, I guess even evaluate city services for efficient and effective city government would fall under the same goal to me. I mean, and like I say, a lot of that stuff, and actually, if you look off to the right, those are all pretty much tied in, effective and efficient operations. But I think those are, like I say, I think that, David, you've done well with the buckets. I think that, what we need to do is again, find the hard goals within this document and key off of those into some subtasks. And then we can get back with the staff and let them know that, obviously secure funding and revenue and, sustainability are probably the two most important things we have, both short-term and long-term. And, and that's, I think that's what we need to focus on.
So so we know that we want to come up with between 10 to 15 goals. It looks like we have a framework on page 3 of the buckets that those would go into. We could continue a discussion, or we could individually, on this piece of paper on 3, write
I think that's what we need to do.
for, if I said this is really important that I think should be under economic vitality, we could do some handwritten things under there or email them to you. What do you think is the best way to proceed?
Again, part of the work session is discussion. So from a staff point, I don't want to lead you too far down the path, but as Councilman Richardson said, is that yes, that statement, identify and secure additional revenues for the long-term sustainability of the city, can be your one overreaching goal. The second common theme that I saw through a lot of this all had a theme to do with businesses, relationships, downtown, your visitor information center, and that corridor, which also is tribal relations. You sort of have a natural bucket, and so I did not take it as far, because I didn't want to start writing your goals, if you will. Sure. It's not my job. But I do see another common theme. I just didn't pull that out and say, here it is. But I'm going to guide you and help you a little bit, because that's what I did with the facilitation, saying you might want to head down that path based on what you have here on the table. If only tonight you come up with, say, 3 to 5 top, we can move things under those buckets, and you'll very quickly have your 12 to 15.
Right.
Comment, please.
Yes.
I think also council should keep in mind that some things are easier to attain than other things. And I'll give the example that I threw out the idea of adopting the Uniform Housing Code. And I've not really had experience with it, but David then suggested the Uniform Property Management Code.
Maintenance code.
Yes, and it's on page 8 at the top. Explore the international, International Property Maintenance Code as policy. That doesn't take 6 months to do. That takes an ordinance, I would believe, and a review by the council so the council's familiar, a consideration of the effects on our city, and it's adopted. And so that kind of thing doesn't need a year's worth of, being in the bucket. And that's just something I wanted to offer. And I think some of these we could look at is how hard is it going to be to do it. I have no familiarity with capital improvement programs, but I think they probably take longer than just adopting an applicable ordinance.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to that process.
And then again, there's the part that you have to get your staff, who's going to handle it. David has to have a plan in order how to implement it. And that's where the hook, line and sinker really kind of, he's stuck with trying to have our staff implement it. And I don't have experience there either, so I'm not a good judge of how long that takes.
So what if we proceeded by looking at the items that are on page 3, but change the language to, you have effective and efficient operations. So is it evaluate or establish effective and efficient operations for the city? And then
Well, the fourth one down is evaluate city services for effective and efficient city government.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you just probably roll with that one. I agree wholeheartedly with Bill that identifying and securing additional revenues for long-term sustainability for the city is a major goal. Every single one of us that ran this last time we're asked about the pool, and it's still a major concern for a lot of the community. I think that's probably one of our major goals. We've all talked about it in the last few meetings that we've been together, right? Like every time the pool comes up.
Right.
There's a few things that we know that are just buckets that we know that
Right.
we've been asked to look into. And I agree, there's some things that are easier to just, we could say we marked it off. We could also say one of our goals is to make sure the grass is cut.
Right.
Check.
Check, done, we did it. But I think that there's certain things that we know the community really wanted us to look into. And I think that we owe it to them to a degree to say, they're also our goals.
Mhm.
We may not get to them all. We may not find answers to everything,
Right, I think that,
but there's so many things that fall under these subgroups as well,
right,
that it's gonna give us a lot to look.
right, which is where I'm doing like with, like to create a citywide capital improvement plan, that to me falls under infrastructure.
So,
You know, that, you know, I mean, there's several things on here that have to do with infrastructure. You know,
so are we gonna go to the top of this list and read down and say yes or no? Or are we going to give them, how do you want to proceed?
what I'm
We
doing
need
is
to narrow.
I'm creating my own buckets, and what I'm trying to do is find a goal, which, like I said, identify and secure additional revenues for long-term sustainability for the city.
Right,
And
so-
that would be my number one goal, and then I'm going through myself, and doesn't mean that you have to do this, but and one of those under number one would be identify funding and implement road improvement projects. That would fall under the, you know, long-term sustainability. I mean, for me, or that could go under infrastructure. Because stormwater, roads, just, I mean, I'll have to think about it, but all those things fall under infrastructure. You know, the permitting for public works, you know,
So,
I mean, those are all kind of, they all fit into different main goals. And then, like I said, to me, there's probably 5 main goals here. I haven't really dug through this yet, but if I'm guessing, there's probably 5 main goals and probably 15, and some of them aren't even on the dot list. I mean, if you look at it, those are all important, like you said, but those could go under subtasks, and then we can go from there.
So, Madam Mayor,
yes.
so I'm a quick listener,
Mhm.
so I'm going to pitch something to the council.
Okay,
And tell me if I'm hearing you correct. So from an overreaching, and I'm going from this list, so if y'all need a copy, I'm on the main page. So the one that got 5 was identify and secure additional revenues for the long-term sustainability of our city.
correct.
The second one that comes out that I'm hearing over and over, which is a logical bucket, is evaluate city services for efficient, effective city governance. The third area that I hear is support, sustain, and seek economic vitality for our local businesses.
Mhm.
The next one that I hear is create and implement citywide capital improvement plan, which is every department, but it is separate from your day-to-day. That is long-term planning for your capital improvement, which is also infrastructure. Now, that's not to say that there's not another logical fit,
Right.
but those are 4 solid buckets. And if that is something the council can reach a consensus of, then staff can go back for your next meeting, start to put those in the individual buckets under those. And then once you see those, you can say, okay, of that subcategory in those buckets, you're going to rank that this is the most important. And that's where we're going to create, this is that top one, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3,
Sure.
within those buckets of what's most important to you. Once you can do that, then we can go to the next step. Did I read you correctly?
I would just for consideration say that I think that the review, revise mission and vision statements ahead of new city branding campaign, like a city branding campaign in general, I think it would be pretty important for us because you can also throw in the July Jubilee pieces and other aspects that I think would be a logical 5th goal because we need to improve our branding. And there's so much that goes into it.
I'm sorry, I don't see I think compared to.
We're doing pretty good.
I don't think that's the point. I think that the point is to improve our infrastructure. And
Yeah. Yeah, well, and what I'm saying is that if,
I don't see that it follows from just talking about branding. It seems very nebulous to me.
if we can improve North Bend as a brand, that improves the small businesses because we have more people coming. The tourism improves. We've got the July Jubilee thing that came up on more than one occasion during the goal setting that brings in a lot of people, and it could bring in more if more people knew about it. Saying it's a much broader approach. Like, I mean, to do a whole new branding, try to get us out there as a city, yes, it can be, but I think it's something that we've never really taken a lot of time to do.
Well,
as a
that
community.
also includes, really honing in our mission statement and
Right.
who we are and
Yep.
what our future is as a city. We kind of rolled over the same thing for a few years. And this is, it's just, again, part of like the focusing of like the direction that we want to go into. So it's more, Councilor Nordoff, than just, updating a website. To me, it is part of infrastructure too.
So.
I
if-
guess, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think my comment would be, and I've heard this since I've lived here, 16 years now. Oh, if people can get a job here, but if they look and the whole street, the city's streets are not good, they're gonna, move someplace else. And so that has nothing to do with brand, that has to do with infrastructure.
But
I think that's under the infrastructure portion, that part of it, you're correct.
Okay,
I also think that, that Eric's correct. I think we both
Okay.
have, I think you both have good.
I'll learn
valid
something then.
points.
I'm
Well, no,
sure I
so
will.
I've lived here, well, I was born here, but I remember in high school, and this might sound ridiculous, but we had a football camp,
Uh-huh.
right? We had a football camp with the Ashland football team during the summer. And they were told they were going to North Bend. They packed shorts because they packed shorts because they thought they were going to Bend.
Oh.
They didn't know that North Bend was not near Bend. And I can tell you, there is a ton of people in Oregon that don't know North Bend is not north of Bend because we are considered Coos Bay. So we need to do a better job of saying, we're not that place. You can go to Bend. There's a hotel in Bend that has a bar that has the North Bend sign in it where they just removed north.
Yeah. And
That's-
North Bend is also between Seattle and Cle Elum.
Nobody really knows
So,
And
that we
that's why
exist.
These are all on the list.
Right.
The streets are important as well. The infrastructure is important as well. That's why
okay.
I really do like the idea of what's on page 3 with the buckets, because I think you have to, you can have all the economic vitality in the world, but if you don't have public safety,
Right.
That's right.
then that doesn't work either.
That's exactly right.
And then if you don't have efficient operations to make the wheel go around, then that doesn't work either. So that's why these, I think, are multiple pronged approaches. Just, for the operations of the city.
Yeah, I mean, I really think David did a pretty good job doing the category.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah, I mean, the categories tell you something where everything's going, so.
Mhm.
But it's more of a task and subtask
Yeah.
thing here.
Well,
That's
and-
all, that's how I read this thing.
And remember, we have many departments in the city that are working on all of these things. too.
Sure.
So they touch on all of it. So if you guys, if you're comfortable with what our city administrator is saying, that he would then kind of go back with this. We
Which
all
ones
agree
did you
start
say
with
again?
the number one, the identify. Can we recap that again one more time?
Yes,
For
please.
the five goals that we're looking at.
All right, so 5 special, identify and secure additional revenues for the long-term sustainability of our city.
Okay.
A little further down, the first number 3, evaluate city services for efficient and effective city government. Second from the last on that page, support, sustain, and seek economic vitality for our local businesses. Then on the next page, about 3/4 down the way, create and implement citywide capital improvement plans. And then what I can do is, I heard, obviously the mission, the vision, the branding. I can look as I put the other 4 in, I will get to the point where I can suggest that 5th bucket and try to find the logical things, and I'll bring that back to you for your consideration.
Perfect.
Does that sound like a good plan, to everybody?
That's great.
So obviously the pool thing would fall into maybe that last one you just read, huh?
Your capital improvement plan should be your pool, because
Yeah.
you have to be able to sustain it long-term,
Yeah.
while at the same time, you have identify and secure additional revenues for long-term sustainability. So your pool would actually be in 2 buckets. And then, once you start to advertise, the branding, the mission, the vision also has a lot to do with everything all the way down to the messaging, your website, all of that for the promotion of your assets, if you will.
That
So there are
sounds
logical
great.
to each bucket.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
What about adopting the international property management one? Would that be in a bucket?
Now, things can still occur that's not on a council goal. You have to understand the purpose of the goals is so the public knows where you're taking them. So where you are right now, where you want to go. And
Okay.
more importantly, it's how your city administrator is evaluated. So when in June of next year, when my evaluation comes up, you want to know, okay, how many of these goals did we accomplish? And that's why you have a team approach,
We're gonna hold you to task.
and you should. That's
Absolutely.
what you pay me to do.
Okay,
And I hold my staff to task.
That's correct.
I think we got a direction.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
So as long as we're on the subject tonight, one last thing, since this is all part of the planning and the budget cycle, it was mentioned that maybe at some point during a work session, we could have the Ralph Dunham show and have a full presentation. Would that be something, as part of this is we want to narrow things down? Would you see that being something we would want to do in the next, say, 6 weeks?
I talked to our public works director, and of course, he's frothing at the mouth to get before you and lay out all his projects, because he wants all of those on the list put first ahead of the other departments. I don't blame him. And so he threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at you. And I understand he's got a lot on the plate. So we agreed that it would make sense for a work session. But we also thought that it was more likely to occur during your budget cycle,
Right.
when you're making decisions and we're starting to look at capital improvement plans and where you're going to. Staff can already start to work on some of the financial stuff behind the scenes. The governing body wants to listen to Ralph for about 2 hours. I can schedule him as early as next meeting.
So what you're saying is basically, under the normal budget cycle, every department comes in and does their presentation as normal part of the budget process.
Yeah, but we were going to allow Ralph a little bit more time, because he's got a lot of needs. He took a lot of time to put together a lot of things that, as he would say, and I don't want to speak for him, would normally be in a capital improvement plan. But he also realizes that he's in a situation where every year his need grows greater, and he would like to know, where we ought to be headed.
Right.
So that's why I said during the budget cycle, we figured we'd have a work session on just public works. You have a lot on your plate right now. If you want us to add, this sooner than later, let me know.
I would say, maybe not this month, but maybe March or April, if the council is okay with that, that would be a good time to see that. So sometime in spring.
Yeah, which really is in your initial budget cycle.
I think that it might be helpful to have a small portion of a CIP presented just on the swimming pool before we kind of firm up our plan of how to finance management and improvements to the swimming pool.
Well, that might lead us into B, right?
Absolutely.
So why don't we make a note that we would like our public works director to we need a work session sometime in spring. And let's, if the council wishes, let's move on to B of the agenda, because it sounds like we've given the direction to our city administrator to like help us hone in some of those goals. You'll bring them back in 2 weeks or?
You'll see them
We'll see 'em
at your next
Yeah.
meeting cycle.
And then before we move on to B, I think Councilor Rodolphe, did you have one more comment?
I do. With regard to let me get my thoughts together now. All right, urban renewal, as I understand it, there can be a vote by the citizens to elect to split the incoming urban renewal money 50-50 with both urban renewal projects and into a separate pot for street improvements. And we have our street situation has been pretty well studied because it got contracted out to the Dyer Partnership and we got a report back, and it goes into a lot of detail on priorities for
Right.
street maintenance. So I think it
Madam
might,
Mayor?
Yeah.
All right, I'm sorry, but point of order, because I've been asked to point this out. All right, so we're going down an agenda item that's not on the agenda item. So you've got your goals. And so the appropriate time would be to put this on another agenda for discussion, which you have a URA meeting coming up. It would make sense at some point to have that discussion as URA, because although you are the URA, you sort of got to be in your meeting URA to talk about your URA.
Okay.
So I want to be respectful of that, but at the same time, you still have a published agenda. So your next agenda item would be your pool levy.
okay,
And so I'm just trying
no,
to,
that I concur.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So we'll go
and I'll
ahead.
make note of that for you.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll go ahead and move on to 3B, which is our levy options for the pool, park, and community building. We have some information on is it page 4 or the 3B. It's a separate page. Okay. We have some separate documents here. There should be 3. Yep, big spreadsheet. Everybody got that? And I believe our finance director is going to be giving us a presentation next.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. I'm here this evening because at your January 25th work session, you directed staff to look into sizing a local option levy for 2 things. So 2 scenarios presented this evening. The first is a local
Excuse me, Jessica. Can you pull that microphone closer to you?
Sure. The first scenario looks at funding the pool operations and its needed improvements. I will go over that in just a moment. The second scenario looks at a levy to fund pool operations, its needed capital improvements, plus parks and recreation, parks capital projects. And this also includes the community building and community building capital improvements. So both of these options would provide relief to the general fund, and both would require voter approval. So the first page is just simply a summary of what I'm about to go over. So we can actually flip to page 2, which is scenario 1. So scenario 1, as I mentioned, looks at just the pool. And you can see here, this is a rate-based levy at 0.69 is the rate per 1,000 of assessed value. This is a 5-year levy, so you see fiscal years 22 through 26. And based on an average home cost, assessed value, this would cost approximately $125 to the average home. And so if you look at fiscal year 22, the third line down, the average home value based on assessed value in fiscal year 22 is approximately $170,000. So that home would pay approximately $125 per year, and that would support pool operations and capital improvements. The second portion of what is in front of you looks at a budget forecast. So you can see a beginning fund balance of $150,000. That's carryover from Fund 11, which is the library, or I'm sorry, the swimming pool improvement fund. Below that, you'll see revenues from fees. This considers current fee revenues plus some contract revenues. Below that, you'll see the levy revenue for total resources of approximately 834,000. Requirements are below that, so that's the requirements in fiscal year 22 for operations, maintenance, and your capital costs. It also considers 3 major capital improvements that I understand need to be done: boiler, filtration system, and one other, the pump. So those are all factored in there. And you can see as you get down to fiscal year 26, that very bottom right-hand column, 159,000 is your ending fund balance. That considers a 2-month reserve, which is typical to have in your fund. So that was our target to get to, and that's how we came up with 0.69 per 1,000 of assessed value. Now, if we flip to scenario 2.
Any questions on that before she goes on to the next?
So that's with us still running the pool, right?
Either us running it or essentially outsourcing it. There's a real question as to whether or not we really cut any costs by outsourcing it. If most of our labor is contracted, we only have one, we would have one FTE on staff. That's what we had currently. We know that we would evaluate that further, because that person would not be a government employee. So you don't have your PERS, your health, all that. You're going through contract services. So we've laid out the cost in the scenario already for contract services. The only entity would be one full-time aquatics director on the books.
But these numbers here include labor, right?
They have all
Yeah.
that contract labor. Everything is contract labor except one FTE.
And that's,
So you really have to question about, can you actually save any additional money by outsourcing it over and above what we have? But it's not something that we would not look at
Oh,
if
yeah,
someone
no.
could come to us with a much more favorable. We know in the condition the pool is right now, Mingus will not take it.
my question is line G, when it comes to total requirements. So. Okay, so that's, is that the capital, is that like split over the 5 years? Is it, I don't understand it, because you've got 611, 751, 820, 694. It's kind of all over the place. on there.
Yes, so it considers some capital outlay, I think approximately 60 to 80,000 each year. That
Okay.
increases a little bit, but in the first 3 years are the boiler.
Okay,
and the
okay, so that's,
filtration.
so it's split between 3 years.
And probably betting on the come that labor's going up and everything
Yeah,
Oh,
else.
yeah,
so
I'm sure
that's
that-
factored in.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Councilman Rocket, do you have a question for the finance director?
I had a comment, not so much a question.
Is it comment time or question time?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you, but my comment is that I've heard a suggestion from someone in our citizenry that there is interest in forming a nonprofit. There is interest in endowments, but there's a consideration of whether or not this, if there's endowments, how to separate it from, say, the general fund and this kind of thing. So I haven't really studied this, but my understanding is that there is interest in a nonprofit that would then go about building a capital fund in order to support the pool long-term. So it's just something that I'm passing on to you without having studied all the details of what was suggested to me by other people.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the local nonprofit that runs the Mingus pool has said that they were not interested in the current state that the pool is in. I was just gonna say, so part of this planning process would be then to get the pool to a state of repairs that would make it more attractive from a financial aspect if somebody was to help us run it as a nonprofit, correct?
So the question is correct. There is, we've been approached, I've been approached since starting here in October. A lot of discussion about creating a nonprofit to potentially take it over. They were working on a business plan. They actually shared that with us. No benefactors have come, but that doesn't mean that they can't do a capital campaign. Doesn't mean that they couldn't incorporate and come, a viable nonprofit for some. They, as that potential nonprofit entity, did approach Mingus Pool and the board about whether or not Mingus Pool would go ahead and take over, if offered, the pool operation. Mingus Pool came back and said, we see a very viable purpose of this pool in our community. It needs to exist, but we are not going to move to absorb that or take it over. And I could see why. In this condition, it's like, once you put all of this money in the pool, I can't imagine who wouldn't be knocking down your door and saying, hey, we'll take it now, because the taxpayers have done all the hard work. As the editorial in the paper that I shared, all pools lose money. It's not going to be any different unless you can monetize the heck out of it through fees, parties, events, everything. And keep in mind that pool is in a residential community on and adjacent to the school property. And so all of that is something that you'll want to take into account. Right now, we have looked at everything and looked at how to efficiently, effectively run this pool to get it to the point where you no longer have and get 20 more years minimum out of it. But you're still going to then have some recurring costs. And so our pool is larger than Mingus. They're about 80 to 120,000 from city support. So we'll always have some, and so that's just the reality of operating the pool. I never just, put off the side that some nonprofit or other entity might want to do an intergovernmental agreement or memorandum of understanding and operate the pool. Like Who's Health and Wellness would do a intergovernmental agreement, or
I can speak to that enough.
Right.
Well, so should we have Jessica continue here with
Yes.
the presentation?
So I can move on to scenario 2. Scenario 2 looks at what we just talked about and also adds the Parks and Rec component. So this is including the community building fund and the Parks Fund. It includes a number of parks capital projects, approximately 940,000 across the 5-year span. And one of those is improvements to the community building. So that's rolled into your requirements in this scenario. And then included in your revenues from fees is an additional 20,000 pulled out of general fund that is brought in each year for community building reservations. So that's the increase in your revenues from fees. Beginning fund balance bumped up just a little bit because there is currently some funds in Fund 18, which is the community building fund. So those are the major differences. And this equates to a 1.82 per thousand of assessed value rate.
Madam Mayor, if I may. So from a visiting standpoint, as an administrator looking from the outside in, that community center, you see these figures that Jessica's presenting. She's going to, continue to walk you through, but you see that amount of 329. I'll be the first to say that if you look at that community building as a senior center, as opposed to a community center rain out, knowing that senior centers generally don't use them in the evenings and weekends, you could open yourself for a lot of additional opportunities. And counting on what Councilor Richardson had previously said, we know that it's also the temporary evacuate center. And so there are opportunities to bring in grants for that building and potentially stave this off. But we can't go that direction until, the council says, it's not a bad idea. You rent a facility right now. We're not involved in the senior center, but again, you can have memorandum of understandings and contracts with entities that could run an entire senior center and then very quickly start to, bring that building up. So we recognize from, potential levy, if you're going to look at the pool crowd, if you're going to look at potentially the senior center and that crowd, and then you look at the parks, you start to potentially give something for everybody for a win-win to balance the load. And so that's the thinking that your administrator's having with the staff as we're starting to look at this. So we know that we could reduce these numbers, but that is always the potential of you make the application and you hope to get the money in. So this is the top end, but there's potential to always bring it less.
Right.
I've got one comment. It looks to me like the parks and the IWA hall bring in about $20,000 a year, huh?
And that's based on community building reservations,
Yeah,
pulling that out of general.
Right,
that's, yeah, not very much.
You're losing
Yeah.
a ton of money
right.
on a community facility.
So I guess my only other comment would be, which is kind of maybe off the wall, but if we, do we have a local option levy scenario for the Parks and Rec only?
Yes. And however, that wasn't your ask. Yes, we do have it.
Okay,
But we knew that in order to get the pool and then Parks and Rec, Miss Jessica had ran that scenario for you. She's probably a little nervous because I said, don't show it, because that's not what the council had
Sorry.
asked.
I think we should use last names too. We're referring to Jessica.
Oh, okay. I usually say Madam Mayor, so.
Only one who's mayor.
Yes, you're mayor who ran all these numbers for us.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that I didn't want any numbers.
okay,
Well,
thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
I was sure their last meeting or whatever, when we started discussing this, that, is there anything on this stuff that shows what it saves in the overall budget?
Well, we pulled out revenues, so if we could flip back to the pool, then revenues pulled out of general fund were approximately 160,000. The cost to run the pool was right around 390,000, if I recall, and this is current budget year. If we flip to the Parks and Rec forecast. you
I
can
don't
get
think
those
that, I
figures.
don't think that's what I'm getting at. I was
Oh.
getting at, if we did take, and the people agreed to this $1.82, what does that save on the overall budget?
So let me, if I may rephrase the question. All right, so if you go to the levy, how much relief does the general fund get by bringing in those? Because right now, we're funding those. So if you take those two costs for operations and whatever capital would be the answer to his question.
Okay, so if we could flip to, I guess, the pool forecast. Let's see if I can follow through this. So scroll up. It's hard to do with that. So your pool costs are going to be current year. Hopefully I'm addressing this. The yellow column going down, so 93,000 is your personnel costs. 394 is your materials and services. So that would come out of general fund. That's currently budgeted in general fund.
So
Well, yeah, I guess my
480.
point is if this is indeed covering this, wouldn't it relieve the whole budget number currently, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so the pool option would relieve the 487,730. Keep in mind that has no capital in it, so.
Yeah.
But basically, you're relieving that off of the general fund, so that is making those funds available.
Right.
So that you're not sitting there having to say, okay, how are we going to cut other things to keep A or B? It goes back to, unfortunately, that shot glass.
Yeah, no, I get it,
Option I
and
gave
I
you.
thought that was the case.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You're
But
correct.
but I would also point out, we're taking out 160,000 in revenue that's sitting in general fund. So you'd have to offset that expenditure by revenues. So it's like 325-ish thousand instead of the 487.
Because you're getting the revenue.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And then where it makes up the huge difference is on the Parks and Rec, because that's only about 20,000. So between the two, it's nominal too, but you have a much greater relief on the general fund if you go to the Parks and Rec.
Yeah, I mean,
kit caboodle.
yeah, if any of these levies would pass, it sweetens the pot big time.
It's still more liquid to put in the shot glasses.
Counselor Nordhoff
There you
had a comment or a question as well.
When you have the levy and you're passing it for either one of these, is that money kept separate from the general fund?
Yes, I would.
It
envision
is,
being
all right.
its own fund.
It's actually required to,
Okay.
by
I'm
law.
learning all this terminology and how things work, and I appreciate that we got that packet on how to finance things. I'm gonna have to spend a lot of time with that. My comment is that I think it was a year ago that the second $15 for the public safety fee was rejected by the voters. And a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth from that second $15 fee. That ultimately resulted in that being rolled back, so it's back to 15 instead of 30. And I think you might run into some public resistance to passing a levy that included a lot of, that went too broad. I think it might be easier to argue that this is just for the pool. We're in trouble on the pool. We really want to, and lobby the heck out of it. We really want to open the pool and we have a plan and we're listening to you. And I think that it might be maybe a smaller step than we really want, but I think it might go down easier with a public that still has some bad feelings about the former, all that stuff.
Well, I think, Counselor Nordhoff, I think one of the main points though is that any levy, it can be difficult to pass.
It's going to be difficult to pass.
What Coos Bay went through with their school bond, and it took 2 times to pass. It's hard because things cost money, and when we, as a community, when we don't have the funds to pay for these things, we have to decide, or is there another way that we can come up with and pay for them, and that is going this route, or we don't have things. We don't have it. And one of my questions is that I think all of us know that if we end up choosing one of these routes, is that there has to be an education process for the community to inform them about this. And so I do have a question for our city administrator. How does that typically work? Is that then private citizen groups that fundraise for campaigns? Is that something that, I know that there becomes a point where as administrators that there's rules on who can kind of campaign for certain things. Do the counselors, are they involved in that, or do they step back from it? Because that would be a piece of this. And I know maybe this isn't the time to have that exact conversation, but I'm just kind of curious because I think Counselor Nordhoff does have a good point that these are going to be really, this may be tough for the citizens to make this decision.
So you're absolutely right. Anytime you make a decision on whether or not to tax yourselves, it's a tough decision. If you look at the vote of the last referendum, although it passed, it wasn't a mandate in the sense. A mandate is a very large sweeping that not no, but heck no. And so there's always going to be opposition, on a tax. The staff and the governing body's responsibility is to get it to the point of the voters. We're allowed to educate, but not go out and lobby.
Right.
And so we're not the lobby group, nor should we. We would violate ethics and have ethics complaints against us. Our job is to educate as to what you are asking the voters to vote on and what it includes, and then you back away from it, and that's it. From the standpoint, and this has been something that is a legal question. I don't have the answer because I haven't asked them. But you see a scenario of a pool, you see a scenario of just Parks and Rec, and then you see a scenario of the whole kit and caboodle, if you will, just potentially. To me, I see it as the pool or Parks and Rec, which includes the pool and everything else. And so the question is whether or not on a ballot initiative, you know, yay or nay on pool, yay or nay on Parks and Rec, and can there potentially be a scenario in a referendum of how they vote? Usually you handle some of that via polling, and we're, you know, that's an independent company, but we're not there yet. And so I don't have that answer from the legal standpoint. But, you know.
I do.
Okay,
Hey,
can
now.
you answer that in?
So the answer to that question from the legal standpoint is you as council members can campaign your little butts off, and please do, because we as staff cannot. And David's right, the letter of the law is that we can educate but not campaign, but the reality of living in this city at this time is that if staff does anything that even has a whiff of an opinion for or against something, we get a complaint. So council members can campaign, staff cannot, is the short answer.
Councilor Nordoff, did you have a question for Jane?
I have an idea that just came to mind. Somebody had suggested it. And what about the idea of forming a park district similar to the library district, where the voters choose to tax themselves a bit, and it includes properties outside the city limits, just like the library board does. It's a special district rather than just, and somehow then that supports the pool.
Make make the pool part of one of the parks. That's doable from a legal standpoint anyway.
Right, and the thing is that what the information that has shared earlier is that a lot of people who use the pool do not live in the city, which that's what we're gonna have to hear from our citizenry, is that, hey, you know, I don't use the pool, so why should I vote for this? So I think that might be an idea that would be novel. And it would include people who use the pool, who don't live in the city, all they have to worry about is paying a little bit higher fee when they come in to use the pool. They don't have to be taxed.
Councilor Gleason has a comment.
I think David brought that up, and actually when we were kicking around ideas was a pool district and one of the concerns that we had was that it also opens up to far more voters that also do not use the pool.
Right.
Where I look at the levy options for scenario 2, the pool plus Parks and Rec, like it's obvious that not only is the pool losing a ton of money, but so is the community center and the parks, right? So
Big time.
right, so we're underwater on both of these things. And one thing that I kept hearing over and over and over again from community members was we need to find creative ways to figure out this funding issue, right? Not just for the pool, but for public safety and capital improvements in other places. These, if we can educate properly and we can campaign effectively from like our side of the house, right? We can make it pretty clear to anybody that's paying any attention that these things are huge losers for the city, but we want to ensure that they're still here for those individuals that want to use it. I think we can make a pretty good case for the bigger enchilada if we know how to make it make sense to the community members that really still want them. The community members love our parks. We're hearing a ton of feedback in how much they love the parks and how much they feel in one way or another about one topic that's happening in a park, right? We have community members that love these things. I think we just need to remind them how much they love them and that we can make a lot of things work by focusing on them.
Councilor Ball.
Well, I mean, just North Bend math here, $1.82 minus 69 cents is $1.13. So the parks and the IWA hall that bring in $20,000 is costing $1.13 if you take this scenario. So and yeah, I mean that's simple math, but 69 is a lot easier to swallow than, yeah.
But I also think that we can get some support from grants for the community goal. For, like you said, move the senior center over there. They got the tables and chairs there right already. I mean, basically the senior center that I know of use it maybe 2 hours a day for lunch. And there's a kitchen facility there. We could probably get a grant to upgrade the kitchen facility, I would imagine. And then also still have the rentals and work around that scenario. You know, I mean, I'm not the grant writer by any means, but I know there's opportunity there. And, you know, I've gone to the senior center several times and been there for lunch. And I mean, there's like 8 people there.
So point of clarification on moving the senior center to the community center. So it sounds like if that was a move that was made, that there would be, if the community center was also the senior center, there would be more grants available. Does that change the scenario on the packet that we're looking at with the pool levy and the parks and rec levy? Would it change that configuration? Because I see what we have before us is a decision to make if one of these levies is what we think a viable choice, or is the third option, do we send staff back to look at what a scenario would be with a parks district? But whatever choice that we make, if we did these 2 or potentially a third one, we would have only weeks before we could file that ballot, correct, Jane?
Yeah, and I can tell you that the district, at least, there's no way we would get it on the ballot for this coming vote. There's too many things that have to get put in place first.
So if we want to figure out how to have the pool open next fiscal year, choosing one of these 2 levies sounds like might be the best direction is what the staff would recommend. Correct, but I didn't let you answer the question about the moving the senior center. Does it change the parks and rec levy?
The answer is maybe. There are more grant opportunities for that senior center because it puts you, it automatically makes you available for community development block grant money, for instance, CDBG, because they're already constituted as low to moderate income. They're on fixed income. If we made it a homeless shelter, immediately, yes, you could get. If we made it a warming shelter, yes, immediately, because those are all in those protected low to moderate income. If you want to use it as just a community center rented out, no. The most is you can get USDA community facilities, and that is a grant/loan. And so when I look at your community from, you know, of a need standpoint, how do you get a facility upgraded and to the point that it's providing great service? And so in these numbers, we didn't factor potential grants coming in because you can't. We know that we can go and apply, but here's the nice thing about that is that if you were to bring in more grant money, it is in a protected class, which means it is in parks and recreation, which means it can only be used in those buckets, which means that money not used on the community facility then can be used on the pool or can be used in your parks. And so when you're looking at other buckets or opportunities, the other thing is that you talked about the district, you lose control on the district. So you have all these other folks, but see, all these other folks are also using your community facility because they rent it, use it, or come. We know that just based on like the drawings we did at the holidays of who wins the bikes, okay? Same thing with your parks. We know that, folks, that's because you're the economic center. Cities are the economic central generators of communities. And so they come in and they spend the money, they're just not doing the tax money. That's the reality. Flip side is when you look at the underlying So when Jessica worked on the scenario, she went to the parks director and said, what capital projects and needs, are out there that just are unfunded? We factored those in. So from an education standpoint, the pool would be upgraded, and during that time, it would last you another minimum 20, 30 years. Your community center would be upgraded, have a state-of-the-art nice kitchen, and be a functional potential senior center. I'm not saying that that's where it's headed. I'm suggesting your parks, that sort of look dated and dilapidated, you're going to have a parks master plan would actually have the money to upgrade those. And so that those parks would be universal for all ages. And then potentially could have money to go out and acquire additional park space. So that's how, from a staff standpoint, we bring it to a governing body and say, this is what's possible. You have to chew on it and decide what direction you want to go.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one's that?
So, all right, so we have, Jessica, was there anything else?
Those are the two scenarios.
Okay. And when is our, Jane might have this information, what is our deadline on when we would file if we want this on the ballot?
I want to say early March. Does that sound right?
And
It
then-
has to be filed with me as the elections officer by 5 p.m. on February 26th.
That's
All right.
where we have till February 20. Oh, I'm sorry, it's in our packet here.
Yeah,
So your next voting meeting is, you've got to make a decision unless you're going to have a special called meeting and you're going to take us down to the witching hour.
And our next, okay,
Meeting, the second meeting, your second meeting of the cycle in February, you have to make a decision, which is,
that would be, we would have to make a decision on the council meeting of February 23rd.
yeah.
So clearly we're, is there any direction that we're giving staff tonight? Do we need any more information? We do have, Counselor Garbo and Counselor Slater are not here right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, thank you for doing what you guys have done so far. I do agree that 69 is easier to swallow than 182.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I don't know if these are hard and fast. They've got to stay that way, but I still think that, in my opinion, I think we need to try to go bigger than stay small, just because we cannot say that we're going to be the ones that get those grant funds. I mean, grants are highly competitive.
It's
And
true.
it would be nice to know that we're covered and make the plan to be covered. Then hope that we can go low and then start getting those grants. Now, that also being said, from the school district standpoint, we've had conversations and they say it's easier to get one re-upped once you already have one than it is to go and let one lapse or go with something big. So I don't know if you start low and hope that you can come in high, but with what Councilor Nordoff said, we've got enough people that are a little bit leery about this stuff. It might, in my opinion, be easier to try to educate on a much grander scale than it is to just say we're only focusing on the pool.
And I guess remember, this is a 5-year levy, right? So in 5 years,
It can either sunset or it can be re-upped by the voters.
okay,
And something very, very critical. And I know folks want to keep pushing back to the public safety, but let's think of that as the previous council and this is a new day.
Mhm.
The reality is you all have a lot that's before you. Recall when I made the first presentation of the pool and I listed all these other things out there. You have a library director over here that's in a building that you, as the governing body, are responsible for. The taxpayers in this community are responsible for maintaining that building. You have to find relief in your general fund. You have $14 million of roads that have to be addressed, and that number is incrementing on a regular basis. So when you are talking to folks, don't just simply allow them to hijack the conversation and talk public safety, because that is much greater. This is not to add additional police officers. We're beyond that, but it is to preserve the level of service that we have in police and dispatch and fire, while at the same time looking at how we can cut costs with those departments. And then move the city forward on the things that have to be taken care of, like the library building.
Well, that's kind of why I asked what this does relieve the budget.
Yes,
by.
sir.
That's a huge number that we want to hear, I think, but yeah, okay.
Well, and Councilor Gall, bringing it back to that first item on our goals that we're looking at adopting that had the most dots was identify and secure additional revenue for long-term sustainability of our city. There's only several ways that you get revenue for the city, isn't there, Jessica? Taxes, grants,
Fees.
and fees. And fees are over to the people. I mean, this is really one of the only avenues if we want to be able to keep those items open for the citizens to use, unless somebody has a money tree. So tonight, obviously it's just a discussion, and we would have several weeks to think about then, well, we would have less because we would want to, at some point, we would need to give you direction to put it on the council for a vote.
Yeah, we only really got a week.
That next meeting, if we were to move forward, when I'm looking at my calendar, on Tuesday, the 23rd is our next council meeting. We would, would you be looking for direction from us tonight or tomorrow night to add it to add a vote on the 23rd?
The reality is, the only way for you all to affect a decision is to have it on the agenda. So we take it from a staff perspective is we've laid it out because you've asked us to, you've asked us to go that path. You've already given us consensus. So the next logical is to put it before you for a vote on that meeting. And you're going to either high five it or not,
Councilor Norhuck, did you?
or high seven it.
So that would be a May election, is that
Correct.
correct? And then are there other elections? Would this, I'm not real familiar. I mean, we just had an election in November. Is this like a special district election, or isn't there an election
No.
cycle, and what's this one? And
It
what
does.
are our
In your
alternatives?
packet, you actually have, it's the last page of your packet actually lists out your election calendar.
Okay,
And so it shows
aha, here we are.
your dates for your elections and what's eligible when.
Yeah.
And so you're under the last part where you have county, city, or district measures and when they can occur. And what has to happen to get on that ballot.
Okay, so would this one be a March election then?
This would be May 18th.
May 18th election, okay, and then there's September, and then there's November. Is
Those are
there
the deadlines, like you're looking at the March deadlines, the September deadlines, right?
It's always May and November
May and November are the two elections.
every year.
So at this point,
Let me get my-
I would say that we would be looking for a vote in the next council meeting, a vote to decide if we were to move forward, but would you need to know which one we were leaning towards voting on?
Yeah, because, when you can make that decision that night, I mean, we'll be ready to go. We know what your options
Yeah,
are.
you got the number.
Yeah.
We know what your options are.
That,
We just need to know, do you want to go? So it's go or no go. And if it's go, which option do you want us to go for? And then staff takes it from there.
I'm sensing the consensus is go on the levy.
Right, it's
But
just which go.
It's not clear, and I really would like to have feedback from Councilor Gardoden and Slater on which one they would want to go on. So
Put it on the next work session.
we could put it on the next work session. Well, okay. So sounds like there's a consensus to have a vote on the 26th of February.
23rd.
But is there a piece in here where we could then, on the work session on the 26th, have one more discussion about which one it would be that we're voting on?
Well, yeah, we would have.
So the work session before the meeting, you always have an opportunity. It's because when you
Yeah.
review it, it's on the agenda. You have that opportunity to discuss at will, and
Mhm.
That seems to me then the logical next movement. Councilor Norberg?
Quickly though, okay, there's a May election and then are there any other elections following in this year?
yeah, next one will
November.
be September.
There's
Is
consistently a May election and a November election every year.
Is
Yeah.
there an advantage for our purposes, considering our levy? Is there an advantage to one or the other? Either monetary or any otherwise?
Well, you get the money a year from when you have the election, if
Yeah.
it's approved. So it'll be a year from November or a year from May.
Statistically, they say November,
Okay.
general elections, you have more success because more people show up, but it's kind of.
So
Yeah,
in
that's what I was
November-
gonna say. We want as many people on our side as we can get. Yeah.
Well, but they usually say to put those on presidential November elections, so we're past that. anyway.
So would more people tend to vote in May or in November?
I think statistically more people show up at a November election. I think you have to also consider other things that would be on the ballot. In November, there could be, it sounds like that the school bond might be on the ballot in November. Man, now you're having
Oh,
citizens
yeah,
choose
you
of
don't want
which
that.
way. So, you know,
School or pool.
It's kind of like you
Yeah.
still roll on the dice whichever
I
way
think
you go.
it's pros and cons. I think that there's things in this community now that we've seen that took 2 times to be on a ballot, the school
Uh-huh.
bond.
So if I can help bring this home, the reason why you want to put it on May is because the pool's closed in COVID and you need the money in to start fixing it
Right.
so that when COVID's done, you can get it open.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
That's
I buy that,
exactly right.
yes,
Okay.
that's true.
That's
All
why
right,
we
thank
keep
you.
you around. Dave.
Mr. City Administrator, do you need any more direction on this from us tonight?
Yeah, you're good.
We still have some things on the agenda.
Yes, you do.
Yes, we
We
do. Okay, we are moving on to number 4. We are reviewing the February 9th City Council agenda. Everybody should have that packet in front of them. This is what will be on our council meeting for tomorrow night. You want to walk us through that, Mr. City Administrator?
All right, thank you. So you have your traditional call and order to pledge of allegiance. You then have your consent calendar. This is your minutes from the January 26th, 2020 meeting. Always like to ask if there were any changes so that we incorporate them so that when it goes to consent agenda, there's not an issue. Did anyone for the city recorder have any issues with those minutes? So it shall remain. You then have public comment. Then we have ordinance 2045. Yes, ordinance 2045. So you may recall that when I came on board in October, there was a lot of conversation. So for those of you that are new that certainly were watching this at home, saw that there was a request to strengthen the marijuana ordinance. That has been done and that's been implemented. However, as part of that process, there's also been concern raised about the number of potential dispensaries that you can have in your community and public safety about how close they are to certain establishments. So staff worked with the League of Oregon Cities and also the city attorney on looking at opportunities in order to regulate how many you potentially could have. I shared with you a map that was generated. Chelsea, did you generate that or
I
came
did.
out? Okay, and so I shared that to show you what you have now. And if this ordinance ultimately was passed, it would restrict. So you would be capped at this point. I also sent to you a newspaper article because at this current time, the city of Coos Bay is actually discussing going the opposite direction, releasing and relinquishing their proximity to potentially proximity to residential areas, which would allow them to increase their dispensaries. From a public safety standpoint, you have your police chief here who had a lot of input into this. But it is a recommendation that you consider going ahead and implementing this text amendment and capping your number of dispensaries at the total number that you currently have. And so that you don't ultimately become a marijuana city, if you will. Again, it's really the will of the council.
I like the idea of the cap.
Yep.
Do any of the counselors have any comments about that? No? Okay.
All right, you have a public hearing, so your city planner is here to address you on the proposal to amend North Bend City Code Title 18 under zoning. Chelsea.
Yes. Okay, well, so this is an application that was initiated by staff. The text amendments relate to notice requirements for your legislative public hearings. So that's not all land use public hearings. That's mostly relates to your text amendments, your comprehensive plan amendments. Typically, the city is the applicant in that case. Not always, but typically. There's also a part on time limits on permits that are authorized under the zoning ordinance. So when it comes to those notice requirements, it's been kind of in the back of our mind for a while. Current code requires no less than 4 newspaper publications. And when you kind of look at that, an average publication for this purpose is about $150. So at the end of the process, the city is putting out $600 per application just on newspaper notices. We think that's a bit excessive. State law does not require any newspaper notices.
Okay. I was saying, what would happen if we didn't have a local newspaper?
Right, or if you didn't have a local newspaper, you can find other means, but the kind of key point is that it's not even a requirement by state law to have any. Now, it's certainly good to have at least one, so we think that it makes sense to make that requirement decrease from 4 to 1 newspaper notice. You reach certain group of people through newspaper, but to also add in requirements to hit a broader group of the public, for posting at City Hall, for posting on the city website, for emailing to your subscribers of notices, and also posting, now that we have social media, to our primary social media page. And so you would reach more people. And so I just want to touch on some public that commented were concerned we were trying to remove the public from participation by decreasing that. And that's just not the case. It's not the intent that we would be removing public from the process. We're just trying to make it a more cost-effective process for the city while also reaching a larger group of the public. When it comes to those time limits on permit expirations, council, I'm sure recalls, we heard the question, does the provision for permit expiration time limits, does that apply to more than just conditional use permits and variances? And council decided, yes, it does. And so we want to clarify in the code that that provision applies to all permits authorized under the zoning ordinance. And then we also want to take into consideration a more reasonable time frame. Instead of an approval that lasts 1 year with 1 year extension, it would be a 2-year approval with the opportunity to extend another 2 years. And so that 4-year time frame would be kind of like a grandfathering in. You don't have to, if anything changed in the code during that time, you're good. As long as you ask for the extension, you're good. And then after that, though, you could get 1-year extensions, but only so long as the criteria doesn't change. If it did, then it warrants a new permit. And so the reason is because for land use purposes, that's what's important, is the criteria. And so if the criteria doesn't change, then there's, the decision should not change, and there's no real reason to come back before your decision-making body. But if it does change, then yeah, we definitely think you should come back. So that's why total of 4 years, you get kind of a pass if you're not making, if you haven't implemented your project. But after that, we want to look at it closer. And so you see in your packets, I think it's on page 29, it kind of goes over the summary of the amendments and then more detail with some recommended findings. And for purposes of the public hearing, the criteria for these amendments are that the proposal would satisfy all the notice requirements, that it is consistent with our comprehensive plan, and that it is consistent with Oregon statewide planning goals and the transportation planning rule. And I can tell you that the proposal has satisfied all the notice requirements. Public had an opportunity for input at Planning Commission work session in December, and also at their initial public hearing in January. Specifically supported by comprehensive plan elements, citizen involvement, hazard, and coastal elements. consistent with the statewide goals and the transportation planning rules. So staff's recommendation would be that based on the application and the staff report and planning commission's recommendation to approve with their recommended findings, that council can find it complies with all the criteria needed for amendment. And we'll be asking for council's approval. And then if council approves, we'd be asking that you pass the following ordinance 2046 with adoption of findings. Any questions?
Councilor Ball?
I read this whole thing and I gotta admit, I wasn't right on the edge of my chair trying to stay up.
I
with
know.
it. But I
always
think
me.
I think you've cleaned up a bunch of stuff by doing this. So, I think it's a great deal there. So,
Well, I'm glad to hear that we're looking at other ways to reach the citizens. People receive their news differently these days, so ensuring that it's posted on the website or here at City Hall or social media, in addition to the paper, probably is good too. Any other questions?
Can we get this an audiobook read by Counselor Gall? Then
you wouldn't want me to read it.
We're just talking about agenda item number 5, or are we also talking about agenda item number 6?
Well, I am talking about agenda item number 5, but is tied to number 6.
Yeah, I'm fine with number 5. I think it's a good move.
All right, so, and you have others to discuss then?
So for number 6, it would just be taking the amendments proposed and the recommended findings proposed in that case during the public hearing, and then adopting them officially through passing the ordinance.
So tomorrow night on number 5, we'll have a public hearing, and then 6, we'll be voting on an ordinance.
Yes.
Okay. And then 7, or
Well, number 6, I'm just kind of shocked that that the permit can be extended for up to, a total length of 4 years. I see that Coos Bay has 6 years, Bandon has 1.5 years. Reedsport has 2, Coquille has 2, and Coos County has unlimited, but we're going for 4.
and I think
I have a-
Councilor Gleason has.
I have a question. Isn't 5 the same as 6?
Correct, it is. So
I'm sorry, what?
5 is the same as 6.
yeah,
Same
5.
ordinance.
Yeah, 5 is the public hearing that, takes in,
I'm
allows
sorry.
consideration and
Yeah, it's just
review.
approval.
Well,
Yeah.
I was looking at this and I'm a little confused. There's a lot of language cleaning up so that the notifications don't have to, it seems like there's a lot rolled in.
Yeah, and I tried to keep it to those 2 points, the notices and the time limits. But to answer your question, Councilor Nordhoff, looking at the adjacent communities, there was the county, which is essentially unlimited, and then Coos Bay that had 6 years. And this is trying to fit within a reasonable, similar time frame. So it's not that unsimilar to what those
Why-
jurisdictions are doing.
Why would Bandon have 1.5 years? And Bandon has like the most sophisticated city codes of any jurisdiction in the county. And I'm wondering why they would keep it at so much a lower level. Excuse me.
I guess, maybe they don't see as many land use cases. I don't know, what their caseload is, but I would, if I had to make an argument, I think we would be more similar to Coos Bay and Coos County in the cases,
Okay,
the
all right,
types of cases we see.
thank you.
So we'll have so 5 is the public hearing, 6 is the ordinance,
Right.
and the zoning. Was there anything else?
Got
Not for me,
confused.
Not from you. Okay.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow night. So that brings us to number 7 on the agenda, correct, City Administrator? We've got the ordinance repealing North Bend City Code, Chapter 2.48, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board.
Yes, all right, thank you. A couple months ago, I had mentioned that staff would be working on bringing forth the repeal of this. And so we have our city attorney who's going to walk you through the process and the rationale as to why this ought to be repealed from our books.
So I will try to be very, very brief. Initially, we were looking at this just as kind of a cleanup operation because we have our parks body, you know, that has done a lot of really good work, but there's been some confusion about where their authority stops and starts. We had one ordinance with the council rules that we passed back in 2016 that threw some more confusion into prior ordinances that have been passed. And the bottom line is we aren't operating the way that 2.48 describes. So that was the original reason to take it out, was just we're not doing this, so having it in the code is not helpful. When I was researching this, just to make sure that we were doing it right, I also discovered that actually it is the law in Oregon that if you are going to put together a Parks Advisory Board, there's a really specific set of rules that it has to follow, including it needs to be voted in by the electors. Also, it's limited number of people. It's different from what we have going on. The mayor is supposed to chair it. The city engineer is supposed to be there. There's a whole statute. And as far as David and I could determine, we did not have people vote in the board as we have it now. We do not have the requirements that are in the statute. So 2.48 needs to go because it is not accurate and it does not conform with the statute. That does not mean that the Parks Board is going anywhere. We are still going to have people working on that body is going to continue to exist. No changes are going to happen in how they interact, as far as I know. We're just getting rid of that ordinance because it's messy and wrong.
Jane,
Yes.
just so we're using the same language, I just wanted, you had just called it a Parks Board. Are we calling it a Parks Committee? Or do we need to make sure that language is specific since we have?
I think that it would be very wise to refer to it as a committee for now because I believe it is a board under the statute. And unless and until we want to add that to our list of things to try to squeeze out before the election, commission might be more accurate.
Committee.
Committee, sorry. Yes.
Advisory committee.
Not board.
Counselor Gall has a question.
No, after reading all this stuff, I don't see as why it just can't be a committee, just like I'm on the fire committee. And when we have a fire meeting with the committee, I'm supposed to bring back and report to the council. So after reading all this stuff, I don't see the advantage of calling it a board anymore. So
Counselor Norgoff has a question.
Well, my comment in response to his statement is that the way it's set up now, committees, the ordinance, committees are set up under the council rules. And the only thing there is how you put people on, how long they stay there, and how you take them off. There's nothing under duties at all. Duties, authorities, responsibilities, there's nothing. It's a big goose egg.
Does it say something about it being an
So
advisory
you
board?
go back
Counselor
to,
Norgoff?
if you go back
Counselor
to,
Norgoff, let me ask Jane something. Does it say something about it being an advisory board?
2.48 or the rules?
may I just say that I did not learn about this state ordinance until this afternoon. It wasn't anywhere in what we were provided. And I took a stand that I didn't think it was a good idea to do away with the board. But now that I understand that there's a conflict with state law, I'm agreeable. But the difference between the board and the committee is that the board was, and it was established by ordinance, which the council rules say, if it's established, unless it's established by ordinance, do this. Well, guess what? It was already established by ordinance. And there's a section that says the duties. It dates from like a long time ago. And it says the duties, you know, and it has a whole text of what the duties are. So that's the difference between a board and a committee. But if it's in conflict with state law, it's in conflict with state law.
Okay.
But without knowing that, I'm like, hey, it's losing all of its duties and authority by becoming a committee for no apparent reason except to conform with the council rules. And the first thing is that it says, unless unless established by an ordinance, well, it's established by an ordinance. But if it conflicts with the state law, then I pulled my case.
Well, we do, and maybe Jane or our city administrator can confirm this. We do know what we want our.
Right,
advisory-
and if that's,
Let me
that's,
answer.
I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm
We
sorry.
do know that we want advisory boards to meet, to involve the citizens, to work together to look at issues and then present them to the council.
Right,
And I don't know, Jane, if that's written specifically in some words, but I just want to clarify that we do know what we're asking our advisory boards to do.
Committee.
Committee.
And
Committees. Advisory.
I would add to that, that honestly, Mayor, I'm not positive exactly where that's written. But I'm pretty sure it's somewhere because it's how everyone operates. How's that for a legal answer? But I had a broader point, which was, oh, there's nothing that says we can't look at the duties in that ordinance and craft how the Parks Advisory functions around that. You know, there's nothing that says we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're just, we don't want something codified that isn't what we're doing.
Correct.
So, and again, also, we didn't have this electors voted in, so it's not really valid as it stands anyway.
Councilor Gleason has a comment.
I'm particularly in favor of the mayor chair piece of it.
of what?
Councilor Gleason is asking the mayor to, he likes the old way it was done, when the mayor could chair the parks.
I'm particularly in favor of
But
that.
I'm hearing
particular
that
part.
that doesn't exist.
That's funny.
It never happened.
That is fun.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, we want to make sure that our committees are working effectively and efficiently. And we want to make sure that the people that are participating in those have direction. And I believe, I was going to bring it up later in our council comments. Well, no, that's tomorrow night. But there is an upcoming Parks Committee meeting. And one of the things that will be happening during that meeting is talking about how that board operates and some training, correct? Yes. So, Councilor Nordoff.
Just a summary, you know, the chapter 2.48 of the city code says what a quorum is. And being as it's an advisory board, you take votes. From time to time, you take votes. And there's in the council rules, there is nothing there that says anything about votes and what weight that should carry with council. So that there was my concern when I saw the proposed change.
And I believe in that training.
And I think it's a valid concern.
In the training that will happen at the first committee meeting, let me ask our city administrator, will you be going over that?
Okay.
Is that correct, that you'll be going over
Yeah,
that?
we'll be going over that, and we also have to introduce, because the committee's amenable, the committee members are amenable to the ethics laws of the state and the city. Also, the rules of decorum for committees will be discussed. And also we will walk through the chart that determines whether or not they're amenable to the Open Records, Open Meetings Act, which is very, very important. Advisory committees by nature are not supposed to be subject. They're fact-finding committees on behalf of the governing body, and the decision power always reverts back to the governing body. So we'll be going through that at the chairman's request.
Okay, thank you. On the agenda for tomorrow night, where were we at there? Was it number 8?
Number 8.
Yes. What is authorization to sign an executive South Coast Regional Early Learning Hub Kindergarten Partnership?
We have our library director, Ms. Haley, that's going to bring you up to speed.
Hey, good evening. I've got an exciting one for us to round out the agenda with. The library is asking for council authorization to sign and execute a subcontract with the South Coast Regional Early Learning Hub to provide an early literacy and kindergarten readiness program to children and families here in the North Bend area. In return for the library's investment, which will be around $3,900 in materials and staff time, we will receive $12,400 from the Early Learning Hub to provide this program. So I think that it's a wonderful opportunity for the library and for families in our area. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
That's the kind of math we like to hear.
That's what I thought.
So you're getting a check.
Yes, we will receive funding, and the funding from SCREL will be used to purchase technology. We can enroll 20 families in the program, and each family will receive their own iPad. Since we're unable to host in-person programming because of COVID, we are going to be doing this virtually. And so we want to make sure that all families, regardless of their personal economic situation or resources, are able to participate. So each family will receive an iPad. We do have Wi-Fi hotspots available. If the family doesn't have Wi-Fi or internet access in their home, we will provide that. And library staff will provide a 6-week program series. Each week will focus on a different early literacy skill or kindergarten readiness skill. And we're going to partner with the school district and DHS to identify families that are particularly in need. And then, of course, it will be open to the public for registration.
Well, I know over Christmas, I was able to participate in a virtual open house and read a story that was virtual. And I would say, I wouldn't be surprised if any of the counselors here would like to volunteer to read a Hippity Hop Easter book or something for spring. So, just reach out to any of them if you're looking for more volunteers to read a
Wouldn't be
Easter
my
bunny
first
book.
rodeo.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, Bill, you've helped us with story time before. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It's fun.
Sure be funner than reading Chelsea stuff.
Yeah. Oh, well, all right,
Poor
thank you very
Chelsea.
much.
All right, thank you.
Bedtime story.
Looks like the rest of the agenda for tomorrow night is the city administrators reports. We will have some committee reports. Well, if we have any committee reports, council comments, other business, and adjournment. Anything else on the agenda for tomorrow night that we know of at this point?
Our illustrious public works director, who knew he wasn't going to get a full work session tonight, does have an item that is burning that he wanted to get before you.
This is more informative at this time, and I visited with Bob Dillard yesterday, so I had to do something with other business.
Yeah.
The new counselors didn't, Bob was called other business Bob,
Yeah.
so. We have one wastewater pump up on our main pump station, which pumps 85% of the city's waste, which is pump station 5. We had bearings acting up this weekend. The other pump of the 2 main pumps that pump, it's a 5-pump system. Very simply, nighttime, normal daily flow. And then when we get the gully washer rains, we have 200 horsepower pumps that cover that. They don't function very well at a lower level. But our average daily flows range from about 400,000 gallons a day in the middle of the night to a peak. Even this time of year, we got almost 5 million gallons. For example, last week was the highest flow we've had all year, last Monday. The 250 horsepower pumps, which we've had problems with, you've approved, have them rebuilt. They're on their 3rd rebuild since I've been here, out of 2 pumps. Not both of them have been rebuilt twice. One of them's acting up right now. The other one's just supposed to get out of the shop today or tomorrow. Come back. We anticipate these pumps have went from, they're only 9 years old. They lasted about 5 years before rebuild. Then about another 2.5. And now we've rebuilt them 3 times in the last, so they're gonna go, and this pumps 85% of the city's waste. We can temporarily work on the other pumps. There's about a 16-week delivery time frame once you order. So once we get some information a little bit better, we may be coming before you or doing it as an emergency purchase to replace those pumps because they are, we knew they were going, we thought we'll put it in next year's budget.
What's the potential number there, Ralph?
If we replace existing pumps we got, it's about 65,000. They didn't hold up very well. So we're looking at a little better quality pump. So I'm thinking 80 to 85,000 potentially.
And is that stormwater or?
That's wastewater.
Wastewater.
And that's pump station 5 that's out on the airport. Like I said, it takes everything except for Oregon Homes Airport Heights, whatever you want. So if you live anywhere below Lincoln Street, it goes to pump station 5 pretty much. What it goes to 4. So just found out the other one was going gone. It lasted 44 days on the last rebuild. So we're really concerned about these things. And we just spent $5,000 on rebuild that.
So from a staff side, one, you don't want them to fail because you would essentially flood the airport with a lot of sewage. That'd be number one.
Well,
Number
7-Eleven would be that.
Number two, then, if they fail, there's a great potential that DEP would be fining us. And number three, it is bad public relations to be in the newspaper, to have that much poo-poo on the front page. And so I talked with Ralph today and said, let's go ahead and get you before the council. Let's do the right thing. Let's look at a longevity on these pumps. The money is in the wastewater treatment plant. Let's not wait to the next budget year. Because we don't want that. We know it's an issue. The fuse is getting shorter. It would behoove us not to sit on this.
Plus you have 4 more months of, right.
And until we get a new pump delivered too.
Right.
That's they're not off the shelf.
Right.
Call them up and just grab a new one. So it's, we've also contacted, just so you're aware, the Dire Partnership. They did a study on, Bob had to do a study before I was here on looking at how to replace them. Since we're all pretty busy right now, I did contact them today to get a price to, so they can pull some off really quick because they've already evaluated the pumps and what needs to be done to change to a different pump. So they're already and spent some time and our money getting ready to do this.
Is there a lot of I&I that comes in so that the volume that's pumping just goes sky high when we're in heavy rains?
We actually have comparatively a low I&I, but we have very little infiltration. Our average daily flow, summertime, August, low groundwater, no rain, 900,000 gallons a day. We just peaked at 5.2 last week, which is, Greg says, the highest he's seen since he's been here. The plant's designed for 9.8 or 9.6. A peaking factor on a big storm of 5 is not terrible.
Good.
It's, I think Tuesday has a 7 or 8 typically. It's within the design parameters of what we've never exceeded. Our permit standards on flow, we did a 20-year projection in 1985 for our plant upgrade in 91, and we have hit plants rated at 9.8 for a 10-year storm. We hit 9.6 in 2006 on a 35-year storm. And so we're actually one of the few people that haven't projected to, I'll put it that way. So,
okay.
But the system itself, the other 200 horsepower pumps don't get used a lot. They're 29 years old. The 50s get used day in, every day. And the last ones we purchased just didn't work well. And we needed to replace them with something that's better.
Thanks.
So bottom line is, depending on timing of this, we may have to go ahead and use my executive authority to make an emergency purchase, We're going to try to see what the timing is. Generally, we like to make those sizable purchases before the council, but given the situation, I just wanted to brief you. And then if you would, very briefly, because I know that the counselor is aware of I&I, but the public's not. And so they don't understand what happens when it rains. But if you can just very briefly for the record, and those not familiar, tell them real quickly what I&I is, so they understand what you're dealing with.
Inflow and infiltration, and inflow is basically rain, surface water. Infiltration is your groundwater through the cracks in the pipe is groundwater level. And March is usually the highest time of the year for infiltration. That's when your wells are the highest.
Saturated.
Your groundwater is the highest in March, end of February, March. Inflow is your big rainstorms, and most years in our case is November, December, but we also have some in January. We had a big one first of February. So, but that's the I&I is inflow and infiltration. Undergrounds infiltration, above grounds inflow.
And unfortunately, if it comes into our facility, we have to treat it.
Right.
It's groundwater pressure into the pipes. It pushes water into the pipes. So it can really jack up your flow.
Well, thank you, Rob, for taking care of that. All right.
Keep us out of trouble.
Yeah, we do have a public comment tonight. Let's see. I think that takes us to number 5 of our work session agenda, which is public comment. And I do have one that I'm going to read into the record, Kaylee. Okay. All right, so this is regarding disc golf course at Ferry Road Park from Andrea Sharman. And she writes, it is my hope that there will be thorough discussion and consideration of the impact of disc golf at Ferry Road Park. We need to consider what is being impacted by the proposed change, determine if a loss is created, and if so, find out if it is available elsewhere in the community. Points of evaluation. The value of open space, very good for health and sense of well-being. The value of safe and relaxing atmosphere, the current use, the current users, including age and disability as an equity issue. How will current use be impacted? How will current users be impacted? Parking issues, atmosphere of environmental changes, national guidelines for the placement of a disc golf course in a busy multi-use park, other possible locations for disc golf, other locations for a displaced park users. Is this activity currently available in our area? Public input heard and thoroughly considered, impact of flora and fauna, impact of homeowners near the course, consult professional disc golf course designers, in consideration of Jim Tockelmeyer's work and the impact on the trees that he has purchased and donated. I'm concerned about the older and less able-bodied that use Ferry Road Park. I'm advocating that they will be valued and considered in this decision. The population does not always hear well, see well, or move quickly, or this population doesn't hear well, see well. I'm a daily park visitor, and I know that many older people feel safe at Ferry Road Park. There are many folks with walkers, canes, and crutches who count on this park for getting outside in a safe environment. Many have used the park for rehabilitation, walking from Joint Replacement. Unlike Mingus Park, Ferry Road Park has easy access from parking. I know an older couple in their 90s that enjoys walks on summer days, sitting at a picnic table near Basket 1. This would no longer be safe for them to sit and enjoy and feel the afternoon sun on their faces. The picnic table is this picnic table is a popular one as it overlooks the bay. Unlike organized sports such as baseball, and in this case disc golf, the other users of the park are not an organized group that can pull together to represent themselves. Please consider this in your decisions. Sincerely, Andrea Sharman. And this is also what we submitted in our meeting minutes for tonight, correct? Or posted, yeah, this is just for public comment. So that ends the public comment. I do want to take a minute to mention before we adjourn, if I may, with discretion, say that I do know that we are having a North Bend Parks Advisory Committee meeting on February 10th. And I did view the agenda for that already. And I saw that on that agenda, they're going to be reviewing the notes from October 5th. And that they're also going to be from October 5th and October 19th. And there's some items that were referred by the council back then that they're going to be discussing, including consideration of proposed compromise to the disc golf course layout. How does this fit within the park's master plan and alternate solutions within our city and in the community? So I feel really good about those items on the agenda because I think it will encompass most of the things that are listed in that letter and some of the things that I've seen in public comment. So unless there was anything else pressing, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn tonight's meeting.